It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. I bet you didn't know that inventing activity by Black inventors peaked in 1899, and it has never recovered. Black and Hispanic college graduates patented half the rate of white college graduates. That's just one of the reasons why you need to know about Invent Together. When our patent system gets more diverse, our nation will get stronger and more successful. Find out how you can help diverse inventors and unleash economic opportunity at inventtogether.org.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rams Nation, what is going on? It is your boy and your host, Sosa Kremenjas. I'm a fantasy analyst at Pro Football Focus and your host of the Locked On Rams podcast, your number one daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams. Welcome back to your Tuesday edition of the Locked On Rams pod. This is going to be our second episode this week, and finally, 1 week into the NFL's free agency period. Everything is happening very quickly here for the Rams, as you can imagine. They've lost a bunch of players, haven't really added all that many because of the restrictions due to the salary cap, but we still have enough to talk about, and part of that dynamic resides in the wide receiver room. The Los Angeles Rams have lost wide receiver Josh Reynolds to the Tennessee Titans and just recently signed, aka last night, veteran Deshaun Jackson to, I guess, replace him or, find a different sort of skill set in that wide receiver room. In the second segment, we're going to talk about the biggest needs remaining for the Rams and covering one of the pieces written over at PFF, according to Anthony Tresh, covering and highlighting what the biggest needs are remaining for every team and specifically the ones for the Rams. And then in the final segment, we're going to hand out our grade for the Rams' free agency job thus far. Obviously haven't had that many moves, but we'll talk about everything, including the Matthew Stafford trade. So to begin, I did mention that Josh Reynolds is officially leaving the Los Angeles Rams. He signed a one-year deal with the Tennessee Titans yesterday, and I'm thrilled for Josh Reynolds. I think he is one of the most underrated players in the NFL, not just because of the statistics or anything like that, but when you look at the fact that this was a guy who was drafted in the fourth round, I believe it was in 2017, in the first draft of the Sean McVay era in Los Angeles, a guy that I believe went to the Senior Bowl back in that time period, coming out of Texas A&M, a very vertical style of receiver. He had to develop a lot of different things in his arsenal to become a starting quality wide receiver, and that's exactly what he became for the Rams. Now, he didn't start up until this past season in 2020, but when you look at his entire career, 2017 steps in for an injured Robert Woods, who I believe had a collarbone or a shoulder injury. I can't recall which it was exactly. Steps in and obviously replaces him to some degree. 2018, steps in for Cooper Kupp, who tore his ACL and all the way through the playoffs and into the Super Bowl run. Doesn't really allow for much of a drop-off there. And then 2019, Brandon Cooks, the concussion issues. Once again, Reynolds is ready for his appearance, ready for his chance to actually break the starting lineup and contribute. Does it again, and then goes into 2020 as a starter for the first time in his career. I think you have to give him his credit. This is a guy who's done a very good job staying ready for every opportunity that he's had. I'm very happy to see him go to a nice team like the Tennessee Titans, who I think are going to run something similar to what the Rams used to run in those 2018 type offenses, where they're going to have Ryan Tannehill under center. He's going to throw a lot of play action, dig style routes, and that's exactly where I think Josh Reynolds is at his best, right? He's not going to be a guy who's elite at any one trait. He doesn't separate like the best of them, probably doesn't have the best contested catch ability, doesn't really have that deep speed like some of the quicker guys in the NFL do, but I think he could do a little bit of everything, and that's kind of what he is as a receiver, a very dependable, solid player, and a guy that you can rely on. Still only 26 years old, still has the potential to take another step forward in his development, and not only that, but as of right now, he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans, and that could change with the draft. I'm actually going to be shocked if it doesn't change, to be quite honest with you, but has a chance to see a larger target share, get a lot more work as a receiver, and that kind of excites me to see if he can take that next step in his development. And the guy that I mentioned that's replacing him for the Rams is veteran, 34-year-old speedster, one of the all-time great deep threats in NFL history, DeSean Jackson. I dug up a few fun stats for us to go over here, and when we look at just his time in Washington, because I feel like that's going to be the most replicable style of usage that we're going to see in that Sean McVay offense. Obviously, 3 years with Sean McVay in Washington. You look at the PFF numbers, and I changed the filter to be a minimum of 100 targets to remove all the small sample sizes. He ranked 27th in explosive pass plays, which are pass plays of 15-plus yards, with 59 of them over that 3-year span. He had an average depth of target of 16.1 yards down the field. That ranked 4th among all receivers. Receiving yards per reception, 19. That ranked 1st among every receiver in the NFL over that time frame. Yards after the catch per reception, 6.4. That ranked 5th. Yards per route run, 2.22. That ranked 9th among all receivers in the NFL. And then when you look at some of these statistics of just 20-plus yard passes, he had 1,571 receiving yards of passes just 20-plus yards down the field. And as you can imagine, that was the most in the NFL once again. So clearly a guy that was incredibly productive in the Sean McVay offense. I think that bodes well, obviously, for his projection here moving into the Rams scheme. He's not going to be a guy that they're going to rely on to be a starter. They still have Van Jefferson. They obviously value Van Jefferson a lot, and deservedly so. He's a very good player, probably more complete than DeSean Jackson at this point in his career, probably a better early down style of player, a guy that's going to help you move those chains. But when the Rams want to bring in that big punch, that big play, a guy that can take the top off the defense, work vertical, help open up everything underneath for everyone around and surrounding him in the offense. Other guys like wide receivers Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, the tight end group of Tyler Higbee, Bryson Hopkins, even the running game. At the end of the day, DeSean Jackson brings a lot more to the table than just catching deep passes. He actually is going to have value just running deep routes. That's going to help move defenders back. It's going to help keep teams in those 2 high safety looks instead of being able to get into single high looks, rotate another man in the box from that safety and give them the advantage in the running game. So I think this is a tremendous addition. I'm very happy for Josh Reynolds to go move on to an offense that's going to allow him to thrive a little bit more. And ultimately, this does put the Rams in a good position to become more explosive on offense, which is something that they've wanted to do since the addition of Matthew Stafford, the trade of Jared Goff, and now the addition of DeSean Jackson, who may double down as a potential punt or kick returner for the Rams. He's done that plenty in his career. He's done it at a very high level, but has not done it a lot recently at his advanced age and with the lack of health that he's been able to sustain, which makes a lot of sense. You want to keep him as healthy as possible, so it's going to be interesting to see whether the Rams view him as more than just an offensive piece that plays 15, 20, 30 snaps a game. That will be fun to see, but I think he's going to bring a much-needed dynamic of juice, explosiveness, and downfield vertical ability to the Los Angeles Rams' offense, and that doesn't leave many more holes on the offense or the defense as a whole. This is a team that is worthy and ready to make a run for a Super Bowl, and that is what we're going to talk about in the next segment. We're going to highlight some of their biggest needs remaining, a piece that was written by Anthony Tresh over at PFF.com, and then we're going to dive into the grades for the free agency period thus far. And while we've got you, make sure to come connect with us on Twitter. You can find me at QBsMEP, and you can find the page at Locked On Rams. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Football might be over, but the NBA, college basketball, and the NHL are in full swing, and BetOnline even covers awards, TV shows, and reality TV. Get real-time updated odds and props on almost anything you can imagine. BetOnline has you covered for all the news, scores, and odds, and it's the best way to place your bets, and it's also free to sign up. You just got to go ahead to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. That's betonline.ag.
This episode is brought to you by HP Instant Ink. No one is reading your mind, but HP Instant Ink knows when your printer is running low and sends you new cartridges, so you never have to think about ink. Save up to 50%. You'll pay less than $5 a month for ink and never run out again. Find out if your printer is eligible and enroll today at hpinstantink.com. Conditions apply. For details, visit hp.com/instantink Spotify.
Get all the sports news you need in under 20 minutes with the Locked On Today podcast. Host Peter Bukowski updates you on the latest news in every major sport with the help of our local experts. Follow the Locked On Today podcast wherever you get podcasts. Welcome back to the second segment of this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Rams podcast. We are into our second episode this week, and I did mention before the break that we're going to dive into a piece written by one of my colleagues over at PFF, Anthony Tresh. He wrote an interesting article that highlights the biggest needs for all 32 NFL teams, and obviously, with this being a Los Angeles Rams-based podcast, we're going to cover what he had to say about the Rams, and I don't think it's going to be much of a surprise when it comes to the biggest needs listed here for the Rams. The top three listed positions are linebacker, meaning off-ball linebacker, center, and cornerback. The one interesting one is cornerback. I could see cornerback being yanked off this list and changed into the edge rusher position. Obviously, going to be a question mark. Now, they did manage to retain Leonard Floyd, and that's going to help fill in some of those holes at that spot. But opposite of him, the Rams don't really have all that much. They have a lot of guys with some potential. You know, you look at Obo Okoronkwo, he's flashed a little bit in his career, but hasn't been able to stay healthy, even dating back to his time in Oklahoma. Then you look at Terrell Lewis, who the Rams drafted in the third round. Highly athletic, highly explosive type of edge rusher coming out of Alabama. A guy that has that prototypical size. You know, he looks very good. He carries his weight well and actually looked decent last year in his rookie season in very short spurts, but man, his injury history is concerning. I'm not really sure how you can rely on a guy like that to really ever be healthy in his career. At this point, he might just be a better rotational kind of guy, maybe a guy you bring in on third downs, that type of role, as opposed to actually trying to rely on those knees, on all that injury history to play 60 snaps a game, 17 games a season now with the whole new schedule update. That doesn't seem very likely to me. So I understand the cornerback listing here. You know, maybe even agree with it to some degree because the cornerback spot is the most valuable position outside of the actual quarterback, the thrower of the football. And the Rams did lose Troy Hill to free agency. He goes to the Cleveland Browns, follows John Johnson, former teammate, former safety of the Rams there. And they're obviously building quite a secondary over there. But that does kind of lessen the strength of the Rams secondary, which was the number one reason that the Rams were the number one ranked defense last season. Now, they are pretty well equipped to handle the losses at safety. They obviously drafted, and we've mentioned this so many times at this point, so many safeties over the course of the last 2 or 3 seasons. You look at guys like Jordan Fuller and Terrell Burgess, the rookies from last year, and Taylor Rapp and Nick Scott, the rookies from the year prior. All guys that I think are going to be able to contribute to this defense. Some of them starting, some of them coming off the bench, maybe in those 3 safety, big nickel, big dime style of packages. I trust that position to be able to be filled internally. That is where the questions at cornerback start. You know, the Rams could ultimately find another corner on their roster that they already like and project as a starter at that nickel spot. They do have David Long, who they invested a third-round pick into. I believe it was in 2019, maybe 2018 at this point. I'm getting my years mixed up. You know, he was very impressive at Michigan. Some of the numbers he threw up there were absurd. Now, doesn't have much playing time in the NFL, and you know, that's not a surprise with the cornerback depth chart that the Rams have had and the relative health that they've been able to hold up at that spot. So still a massive projection for Long, but he could factor into that nickel spot. You look at some of the other names, maybe a guy like Dante Dion. He's been somewhat of a career backup, a guy that's bounced around a little bit, but I feel like every time he's played in the preseason, at least, he's been a guy that's flashed to me. Like, he has some legitimate game. Smaller in stature, like a David Long style of player, so probably projects best inside, which is obviously good for the Rams because they do have Jalen Ramsey and Darius Williams on the boundary. That's not going to be an issue for them. So, you know, that could be filled internally as well. When you look at the center position as well as the off-ball linebacker position, you know, there's no surprise here. These are 2 weak spots on the Rams roster right now. Probably 2 of the only weak spots other than edge, in my opinion. You know, the center spot could be filled if the Rams do ultimately decide to re-sign Austin Blythe. And they do have $4.75 million on the cap, according to Over the Cap. Now, that is prior to the Deshaun Jackson signing, so probably a little bit lower, maybe in the $2 to $3 million range in terms of cap space. I think they probably could open up a little bit more and, you know, maybe go find a center in free agency, whether that be re-signing Blythe or finding his eventual replacement. So it sounds like the Rams are going to try to still make a run at Blythe. We don't really know what his market is or what it's going to develop as. I'm going to expect him to probably be a little bit priced out of the Rams range, and so that would leave them with a big hole at center. Probably one of the easier positions to fill in the draft, in my opinion. Plus, there are a boatload of names, guys like Landon Dickerson, Creed Humphrey, that could be available at that spot. Even a Quinn Miners, who the Rams have already had 2 pre-draft meetings with over Zoom. So it sounds like the Rams may be planning for days post-Blythe. That may be the plan here. That may be the expectation for the team. And if that is, I think they could be able to find an adequate, maybe even an improvement at the center spot with some relative ease depending on where they plan on drafting a guy. Now, that leaves the off-ball linebacker position, and this is one of the worst spots on the Rams roster, probably the worst position group on the whole team. Micah Kiser, a question mark after last year, couldn't really stay healthy, and when he played, a questionable player in my opinion. Troy Reeder, I think he's best suited as a career backup, a special teams kind of a guy. Now, he developed a little bit last year, but I still would not count on him as a starter. And then the other guys like Kenny Young, Christian Roseboom, who the Rams apparently like from their practice squad, and Trayvon Howard, who was slated to be a starter last season, but suffered a season-ending injury prior to the beginning of the season, so didn't really play. A lot of question marks in that group. You know, you can't really rely on any of these guys, in my opinion. It doesn't seem like the Rams value this position all that much, so they may just go into the season with some of these guys starting and pretty much just a mix of these guys once again at this spot. That wouldn't shock me at all, but at the same time, this draft also has some good off-ball linebackers. If that's a position that the Rams want to explore drafting, you know, I think they could very easily find an upgrade and a day one starter at that spot. If not, you know, they made it work last season with the guys that they do have. They were the number 1 ranked defense. I think they could do that again, but they will have to invest in some other positions like the edge spot as well as the cornerback spot. And that does take us into our last segment where we are going to hand out our grade for the free agency period and performance for the Rams and general manager Les Snead thus far. And make sure to keep checking back in with us here every day at the Locked On Rams podcast. We're going to continue our coverage all offseason long for the Los Angeles Rams. Folks, are you having any car troubles? Do you ever go outside to find your car tires flat or your car won't start? Well, you should absolutely check out rockauto.com for your service needs. They are a family-owned business and they've been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. We know there is no better time than right now to support a family-owned business with this COVID stuff that's going on around us. And if you are a do-it-yourselfer or a professional and you're looking for reliably low prices, you should just go check out rockauto.com. Go to their website and check out all of their available parts. It's a never-ending list, and if your car needs it, I bet they probably got it. Amazing selections, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us so they know that we sent you. We've been telling you about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market for a while now. Built Bar is the amazing low-calorie, low-sugar, high-protein, high-fiber, amazing tasting protein bar with 100% chocolate on all bars. Now's the time to find out which Built Bar is the best with their Built Bar Madness style tournament. And today's matchup is going to be between the chocolate brownie chunk bar and the lemon almond cheesecake. 2 incredibly delicious bars. Like coconut, like I've told you guys, I love anything cheesecake related, but I think I'm going to have to go with the chocolate brownie chunk flavor. Something about brownies and chocolate, I mean, that combo is undefeated, and like so many of their bars, is just out of this world, including the texture of the bars. They are unmatched in the industry, in my opinion, and all you guys have to do is just go to BuiltBar.com or to their Twitter at @Built_bar, and remember to use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. That's LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order at BuiltBar.com, and check back to see who won today's matchup and who will become the best tasting protein bar. The NFL Draft is weeks away. It's time to start following our Locked On NFL Draft duo. The Draft Dudes podcast watches every prospect so that you don't have to, and the Locked On NFL Draft podcast is your daily draft news and mock draft podcast. Follow Locked On NFL Draft and Draft Dudes on the radio.com app or wherever you get podcasts. Welcome back to the final segment of this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Rams podcast. It is your host, Sosa Cremenges, and I appreciate you guys for making it this far into the show. And I did mention prior in this episode that we are going to hand out our grade for the performance of general manager Les Snead and the Rams and their front office as a whole and as a total for this year's free agency period and market. I'm going to keep this relatively quick and short, and obviously, the Rams didn't make all that many moves, but I will include the Matthew Stafford trade in here, as well as the signing of Leonard Floyd and Deshaun Jackson, and then maybe just that trade of Michael Brockers that did send him to the Detroit Lions. So the grade for the Matthew Stafford trade gets an A+ for me. At the time, there was really no better option other than trading for Deshaun Watson, and as we know, with the whole off-the-field stuff going on right now, probably turned out to be a good thing that the Rams didn't trade for him. Matthew Stafford was the clear-cut best quarterback on the market available. The Rams took a major step in upgrading that quarterback spot, going from Jared Goff, a very safe thrower of the football in terms of not wanting to push the ball deep now, not safe in terms of holding off of turnovers, because, the guy led the NFL in turnovers over the past 2 or 3 seasons, so not a safe thrower per se, but a safe philosophical style of player. So that was not really conducive to success or explosiveness on offense. Got very stale and boring, and the Rams sort of just kept going in the same circle through the same motion. So they made an upgrade to a quarterback that is very different from Jared Goff, a guy that has a lot more mobility inside the pocket, a guy that does a better job reading coverages, stronger arm, better thrower of the football, and a guy that's willing to push it deep. You can't really make enough of this impact. You can't really describe just how big of an upgrade this is. I think it is a massive upgrade, to be quite honest with you. I know a lot of people don't agree with me, but at the end of the day, this one gets an A+ for me. The Rams paid a lot, sure, but they noticed that they do have a Super Bowl window available right now, and they do believe that Stafford could be the guy to help get them there, and I tend to agree that this was worth the risk versus reward here. You had to take the chance. Stafford, A+ for me. Leonard Floyd, that one was a little bit more expensive for my taste. I would probably have to give this one a C, not necessarily because Floyd isn't a good player, but I thought the Rams had a lot better value in the edge rusher market. We still see guys like Jadeveon Clowney and Melvin Ingram, 2 names that I've mentioned a lot, specifically Ingram on this podcast over the course of the last few weeks as potential replacements for Floyd. Now, the Rams ended up paying him $16 million per year and $32 million guaranteed on a 4-year, $64 million deal. So quite expensive, but we do know what Floyd is in this defense and in this system. A tremendous run defender on the edge, a guy who can get to the quarterback a little bit, had a career-high 10.5 sacks last season, started to show that development off, very athletic, can drop in coverage, can run a lot of those games and stunts up front, moving around across the defensive line. So that's very exciting stuff. Now, like I said, I do think they overpaid a little bit, especially when you look at some of the other contracts, like the Romeo Okwara one, which I believe was $13 million a year, or Carl Lawson, who might have got $13 or $14 million per year from the New York Jets. I felt like there was better value out there, and especially when Ingram and Clowney signed, we're going to really start to see just how cheap this second round of edge rushers were in the market. But the Rams felt comfortable with Floyd. They got ran up a little bit by 2 other competing teams that wanted Leonard Floyd in the Denver Broncos and the New York Giants. And ultimately, they got to keep their guys, so that gets a C from me. Moving on to the last addition so far, the Deshaun Jackson signing. This one gets an A for me. There is very little risk here. A lot of potential reward. A guy that could be a kick returner for the team, a punt returner, obviously going to offer that deep threat presence. The Rams knew they needed to get more explosive on offense. They knew they needed a guy that could stretch the field on offense at that receiver spot, and they go out and get a guy who is a California native, arguably the greatest deep threat in NFL history, or at least one of, and a guy that does want to finish his career out with the Rams. Now, we don't know what they paid yet or just how much, but at the end of the day, I'm going to presume that this is a relatively cheap deal. So for me, this one gets an A. I think Deshaun Jackson has a perfect role and a perfect fit for the Rams offense and a proven track record of success with Sean McVay dating back to their time together in Washington. Moving on to the final move so far that the Rams have had this free agency period. The trade sending defensive tackle Michael Brockers to the Detroit Lions for a 2023 7th round pick. This one gets a B+ from me. I didn't really think they were going to be able to get anything from Michael Brockers. My expectation was that they could potentially cut him, specifically as a post-June 1 cut in this offseason, especially when you consider their cap troubles. This was strictly a cap-style move. You look at their current depth chart at the defensive tackle spot. Aaron Donald's obviously there, and then behind him, Sebastian Joseph Day, a name that has developed very quickly, rapidly last season, needs to start going into next season. A'Shawn Robinson, who they signed last year in free agency after they thought they lost Brockers to the Baltimore Ravens. And not only that, but Greg Gaines, a guy that they drafted on day 3 of the draft a few years ago, a massive nose tackle, run-stuffing type of presence. The Rams are loaded at the defensive tackle spot with guys that could play the run, and that was pretty much all Michael Brockers did at this point in his career, so makes sense that they moved him. That pretty much concludes all we've got for this episode. I appreciate you guys, as always, for listening to the podcast, for checking back in with me here at the Locked On Rams pod. And make sure to keep checking back in with us throughout the rest of the week, because we're going to continue to update you guys with the Rams moves, as well as the players that they may potentially lose throughout the rest of the free agency period. Just a reminder, come connect with us on Twitter. You can find me at QB's MEP, and you can find the page at Locked On Rams. Please subscribe or follow to get our latest episodes, content, breaking news, and a whole lot more.